Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing A Letter to the Luminous Deep by Sylvie Cathrall. This was a book on my to-read list. I love the cover and I decided to check it out and give it a read and get it off my to-read list and onto my read list, and I am so glad that I did. Today I'm going to be talking about this book, the plot of this book, and what I liked about this book and other connections that I found in reading this. So please, as always, put your thoughts and comments on this book in the comment section and let's dive in and talk about A Letter to the Luminous Deep. The book itself, and maybe I should have guessed this from the cover, is set up entirely in letter format. Now, I went into this book almost completely blind, knowing almost nothing about it, besides the fact that I liked the cover and that it was science fiction, but it is written entirely in letter format. The letters say who the letter is from, who it is to, and the year it was written in, and it is divided into conventional chapters, but the chapters are just collections of letters that are kind of there to move the plot along. The letters are taking place across two simultaneous timelines. So we have some letters that begin in the year 1002 and some letters that begin in the year 1003. And as we advance through the story, the timelines move chronologically forward. So we're starting at the beginning of these letters from 102 and the beginning of these letters from 103, and they're interspersed and mixed in with one another, moving forward as we tell the story. We quickly learn that we are following an underwater or an on-water society. So these are humans that are living on a planet that is entirely water-based. The letters from 1002 are from two individuals, a woman who goes by the name of E and the person she's writing to who is a scholar who goes by the name of Henry. E has started this correspondence because she lives in an underwater house. She looked out the window one day and saw a strange animal that she had never seen before. Now, E is a little bit maybe agoraphobic. I'm not quite sure what the term is. She's quite isolated. She struggles to make social interaction, and so she spends a lot of time in her house, but she decided to take it upon herself to write this letter to the scholar to see if he could identify this fish. This initial letter kicks off a storm of letters between them and the start of a correspondence in which these two individuals really find that they have a lot in common and really start to enjoy each other's company. The scholar Henry also tends to be a little bit different from the other scholars and is really enjoying getting to know E through this process, and their initial communication blossoms into friendship, which blossoms into perhaps something even more. Those are the letters going on from 1002. Now, why are we even reading these letters? That's what we find from the letters from 1003, where we quickly learn that E and Henry are actually no longer with us. They have passed away, and it is, we're not sure why exactly. There seems to have been some sort of accident. And the letters from 1003 are between E's sister, Sophie, and Henry's brother, Viren? We'll go with Viren. And they are writing to each other because both of them have lost a sibling and they are both trying to process their grief while also trying to figure out what happened. They both have one set of the letters because Viren, Henry's brother, would have the letters that E sent to Henry, but Sophie would have the letters that Henry sent to E. So they both have one half of the puzzle, and they're also interspersed between these two set of letters are letters other people sent to each other. So for example, Sophie sent letters to E, and we have letters between Sophie and the person Sophie started dating. So we have other media mixed in, but it's primarily letters between those two pairs. So Viren and Sophie decide to get together to solve what happened, and they begin writing letters and comparing and putting the letters that they have together in chronological order to see what happened to Henry and E. They seem to have gone missing. It is that they are presumed dead, and there seems to have been some involvement with a mysterious object which appeared outside E's house shortly after she began writing to Henry about the creature that she saw. There seemed to have been some sort of object that appeared that had mysterious properties, and as the story goes on, we also see that this mysterious object may have had connections to a dive mission that Sophie went on, Sophie being E's sister. Sophie is also a scholar and has been diving into a deep trench in the bottom of the ocean, and they have been discovering very strange and odd things on this mission that don't make sense and may be connected to this mysterious object, which may be the impetus for the disappearance or the cause of the disappearance of Henry and E and the presumed death of Henry and E. So all of this is taking place in this world that is existing on an entirely water-based planet that is struggling, or they're not struggling. The society is thriving just fine, but there seems to be a connection to a distant past, a world that they say was before they fell. So they have this myth that they used to live in the sky and they since fell and now they're in the water. And is it perhaps possible that E and Henry discovered something about the mysterious past that led to their disappearance/death. Who knows? You're going to have to read this book to find out. I really enjoyed this book. I thought this lived up to my expectations, and this to me was a 5-star read. I started it thinking I would read it over the course of several days. However, I actually wound up reading it in 2 days, split up, and most of it was on one day because once I started, I felt like I kept reading. The letter format is really, I would say it's good, but maybe it's bad. It hooks you in, and you think, because the letters are so short and there's multiple of them in a chapter, you think, well, I'll just read one more letter. I'll just read one more letter. I'll just read one more letter. Oh no, I'm at the end of the chapter, but I can just read the first letter of the next chapter instead of having chapters which are maybe easier for me to stop at. So I do feel like there was a part of this that made me keep reading that I really enjoyed. And maybe it also took a lot of time, but I read this very, very quickly. Even though it's a little under 400 pages, I flew through this and I had a fantastic time reading it. I feel like the author did a really good job of setting up the world. When it comes to sci-fi, I want to be sold on the world building, but I don't need the world building to take a lot of time. And I don't really necessarily want just like exposition dump happening at the beginning explaining how the world is built. I don't mind it sometimes. If it just gets the story moving, that's fine. But I feel like Catherall in this book displayed the trait of being able to build a world without just giving some exposition of what happened. And I think she did it really, really well. I felt really invested in the world by the time we got through with the book. I felt like I understood the hierarchy, and I'm very, very curious about this past civilization that they seem to have connections to but not know a whole lot about. So I think the compelling nature of the unique world that they're living on and the unique situation that they were living in really sold me on the world building in that setting in and of itself. I also like that the author kind of had this sense of unease throughout the entire book, in that there's people who are missing, presumed dead, and there also seems to be an object which is associated with it. And that object, which appeared outside E's house shortly at the beginning of the book, it's not horrifically spooky, but it's just enough to be uneasy. It's just enough to cause you to think like, okay, what's going on? And that really, I like that sense of unease that the author was just able to cultivate without being very explicit in the unease. When reading this book, had some suspicions that maybe some people weren't being 100% honest with what was going on. There was, example, another researcher named Eleanor, who actually was the love interest of Sophie throughout this book, who I felt like wasn't being 100% honest about what happened in previous missions that may have tied in with this mysterious object. I felt that right away. I also felt like a family friend whose name is pronounced like Jem or something. It looked French. I wasn't sure how to say it. I also had suspicions about her, and I think E did as well. So the author brought that in, that maybe the family friend knows more, but there's definitely that sense that more people in the book know what's going on that they're willing to let on. I think the whole book also had a little bit of a Victorian feel, for lack of a better term, despite it being a science fiction water-based civilization. The letter writing felt very formal and had a lot of Victorian stylization to it, I felt. And there's a heavy emphasis on propriety and decorum and the correct way of addressing people. It felt very formal in a lot of ways. And I also got the sense that the author has engaged in like writing activities, for lack of a better term. I mean, not just writing, but like letter writing activities. And both of my suspicions were confirmed when I read the author section in the back. It looks like the author actually married her pen pal, which explains the budding romance between E and Henry that we see developing throughout the book. And she says that she has a graduate degree in odd Victorian art and has handled more than a few 19th century letters, which definitely shows. I think that was a heavy emphasis or a heavy influence on this book that you can definitely see. There was another connection that I felt throughout this entire book, where there's a piece of information that has been passed down, not directly, but in the form of a poem that's been kept in cultural, literary tomes. There's a poem that has been written, and there's some literature that has grown up around certain topics that has just been built into the culture of this underwater society that people throughout this book begin to suspect is actually conveying important information. And I felt like there was a connection there, or I couldn't help but make a connection to, I'm not sure if you'd call them scientist ethicists, who kind of approach this problem, this thought experiment that I've heard many times before. This is not unique, about how we convey to future generations, and I mean us, like you, me, convey to future generations the danger of radioactive waste if something were to happen where we no longer had access to like the written word. Or I'm saying this very, very poorly. If there was a collapse of civilization or some drastic change in civilization in which maybe the way we're writing and our usual radioactive symbols, all of that fell out of the cultural ability for people to access, but there were still humans on the earth. What are ways that we could warn people to stay away from areas where we have put radioactive waste? Because just because our civilization fell and we no longer use the written word or languages that we're using now, we would still need to convey to people that they need to stay away from radioactive waste because it's going to be radioactive long in the future. And there was this idea put forth that you build rhymes or you create legends around things like glowing cats. I know that's one of them. That these are things, if you see a cat glowing, you should avoid that area. And the cats would be genetically modified to only glow in the presence of radioactive activity. Or you create legends around certain areas where people should avoid. And that's really what reminded me of this literature in the book that has been created that's meant to pass on vital information that isn't being conveyed directly, but is being passed on in the literature or the literary realm in this civilization that's important. And this literary information is being passed on from that previous civilization that lived in the sky. So it's a civilization that has fallen that is now trying to pass on important information through this literary work. And it just reminded me of the thought experiment of how we as a society would pass on important information about dangerous materials left in certain parts of the earth to another civilization if, for example, all of our written records were destroyed. How would we still be able to convey and communicate that information? That was just a connection that I made. Finally, I want to point one thing that really tripped me up, and maybe this was because I didn't do enough reading beforehand, and I really hope I'm not the only person who was confused, but it's possible because I'm really slow to catch on sometimes. I thought the characters were fish for like the first 50 pages. It's kind of embarrassing. I was like, I couldn't tell if like their homes were filled with water. I feel like I started figuring it out when people started talking about an airlock, and I was like, okay, I think these homes underwater are like, I think these are humans. I think these are humans. But it took me an embarrassing long time to realize that the main characters were human and weren't fish. So be warned, and please let me know if I'm not the only person who thought that. I don't know why that took me a long time to figure out, but they're not fish. Don't be confused. This is really embarrassing. I shouldn't have even admitted that. I thought they were fish for a while. They're not fish. But I figured it out, and it's 350 pages, and most of the time, like, it is pretty easy to figure it out, and most people who are smarter than me, which is pretty much everyone, is going to be able to figure out that it's not fish. I highly recommend this book. I loved it. I love the writing style. I felt like the letters were unique. Maybe it's not unique, but I haven't read any book like that. The most similar thing to this that I read were those, like, were they called Dear America, where like they were like fake journal entries. They were historical fiction that I read a lot when I was like a kid, and that's what it kind of felt like. I really liked the letter format. I liked the two moving timelines that went back and forth with each other. I felt like the story was interesting. I liked all of the characters, and I liked the mystery and unease, not knowing what's going on, but trying to solve it with the people who are solving the mystery in the story. So if you have not read A Letter to the Luminous Deep, I enjoyed it, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I would like to know what you liked, what you didn't like, whether or not you thought the people were fish, or if I'm just way off base and had no clue what was going on. Please let me know in the comment section down below. I love to receive your comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of